All right. Well, this starts our second session then. Session is working with agents and agencies. And this is going to be a fun session because everybody else asked, how do agents get paid? What do agents do? How do I find a good agent? And hopefully today we're going to be able to answer some of those questions. So we have Bob Walker, who I've known a long time. Bob's with Connections. Connections, I mean, Bob, you sponsored the Deegans and used to be Trey Kennard, and you got AMA Motocross, Lucas Oil into the AMA Motocross series. You've done a lot. I think your boy Haiden is doing his pro debut tomorrow at the Ironman Nationals, right?
Yep. Big day tomorrow for Haiden. I think the whole industry is excited to see what he's got.
Should be good. And Lew Lewis, Lew's on. Lew, actually, I've known Lew a long time, back when he ran the McGrath Motorsports from 2013 to 2020. Lew, how are you?
That was a fun ride. Yeah, I'm doing great.
That was
nice
a fun
to be
ride.
here.
Yeah, the transition into the four-wheel as well. And Jimmy
Yes.
Button from Wasserman Media Group. Wasserman obviously represents Chad Reed and tons of racers, but Jimmy himself represents Dylan Frandis, and he should have an interesting weekend as well.
Actually, he's not going to have an interesting weekend. He from the wreck he had last weekend at Budds Creek, he's not going to be able to ride this weekend. So
he's not going to ride. Dang, I wasn't sure about that.
Yeah, unfortunate, but that's a life of motocross.
That is the life of motocross. Well, Eric Morley from Blue Sea. Eric you've worked with riders like Cameron Steele, obviously through Maxxis Tires doing promotions, and you did the Deegan versus Deegan.
Yeah, actually the Deegan versus Deegan was through Maxxis. Cameron was with some Yokohama
Yokohama.
Some BFG stuff. And yep.
But you also represent Monster Energy, Wahoo's Fish Taco, Red Cap, Acura, Honda. You take the agency angle from a whole different perspective.
Great to be here, Alex. Thanks a lot for the invite.
Right on. So Bob, I'm going to start with you since Hayden's at the Ironman Nationals this weekend, doing his pro debut. Where are you? Are you there also?
I wish I was. I'm getting in a car and driving back to California after this call or after this session.
Right on.
Heading back to San Diego, but I have staff that's out there supporting them this weekend. I wish I could be there for the first race, but I'll get a chance to see him race next weekend at Paula.
Right on. Well, we're going to drink some wine next week, so I'll see you in
That's
person.
That's true.
But let's hear real quick. You did a great session on Meet the Sponsors. We talked for 45 minutes about what agents and agencies do. Every agency is different because you grew up with Deegan, you known him a long time, you became his agent and you're a proprietor versus, let's say, Jimmy, who's with Wasserman Media, which is a large organization, represents a lot of athletes. What do you do for your athletes specifically that creates value to them, that if a rider needs an agent, they can expect to get from someone who works with them like you do?
We do everything. I mean, and I'm sure on Jimmy's side, they do the same. I mean, we've worked together. I've been at the big shop at Wasserman. I've been on the small side. I've been at Omnicom, which was even bigger as a publicly traded organization. But there's a lot of things we do as representation for our clients that aren't tied to money. The saying that I use is they become our family. You know, when they're sick, we're sick. When they're hurting, we're hurting. When they're celebrating, we're celebrating. And it's a lot of things that we do that's even really hard to pinpoint. I mean, it could be helping them with issues in their own household. They need something done. You know, it's like I tell my staff, like, not always about just making money. It's our fiduciary responsibility to support our client with whatever they may need at whatever time they may need it. It's a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day job, and you're always on call. No matter where you are in the world, you're always on call for your clients. When they need you, and you got to drop everything and handle whatever that may be for them. And I know that might be a very broad, gray answer, but that's really the reality of it. We are there for whatever they may need, whether it's from a business standpoint or a personal standpoint. Could be family related, but you really do become family with your clients.
Right. Yeah, and you represent families as well. Lew, how about you? When it came to Jeremy's program, I think you did everything, if I remember right. Seeing you at the track, you're all over the place all the time.
That's true. Is my video coming through? I was having some technical difficulties.
It is not, but we can hear you just fine, so that's good.
All right. Well, I'm still working on that one. Well, as a team manager, yeah, I didn't expect to take on the role as an agent, but when you're a team manager, you wear all the hats, and especially when we're a startup. And it sounds funny to say startup when you say Jeremy McGrath, but we came to the realization that we both had to do a lot to start up a truck racing team. And you think if you send in a deck or a call that you're going to get sponsors flooding in, which is not true. Like, it was really difficult. We spent, several months before we landed a title sponsor. And during that time, you become humble and you figure out, all right, well, we're not just going to get this whale that's going to support our whole team with one logo on the truck. We started realizing, the trickle down effect is very important, and we need to work with as many people as possible to show that we're racing, to show that, we're involved in the sport, all the way down to, free product. We took it to that level. So, yeah, I mean, what a learning experience for both of us to start a team and really become rookies. Because, I've been with Jeremy many years. We had a Clutch Films business. We've done, countless videos, traveled the world, and pretty easy street during the Supercross career. And during that time, like, when we needed something, it would happen. And Jimmy was a big part of that too. He was there. He can attest to that firsthand. So I'm glad that I'm, talking on this level of where, you find out how important every little sponsor is and what you can do to give back to each and every one of them. So yeah, it was a great journey. And like I said, it was great to meet you on that trip, and love to keep talking about it. So
we will. Yeah. And then, hey, so you mentioned Jimmy, you come from one of the largest media houses out there with a lot of athletes and a lot of power and strength. And how is it different what Wasserman does for teams, or is it any different?
I don't think so. I don't think it's any different. I mean, like you said, heck, me and Bob were business partners when we started our first agency together, 20 some odd years ago. But, I think we're all the same, right? You really do, to Bob's point, everybody does become family. And whether you're in a big agency like we are with 1,200 employees and 2,500 athletes globally that are on the roster, I can tell you it was a lot easier when we had 27 employees and you knew everybody. But
it's 2 to 1, 1,200 employees and 2,500 athletes. Wow.
Yeah, it's astounding how large Wasserman's become. But I'm really focused on just what I do in the motorsports arena, and I trickle into some other sports here and there, but we all do the same thing, And I think Bob mentioned it best. We do everything. It doesn't really make a difference what it is. It could come down to helping them, find the right doctor, or find the right attorney, or the right money lender to buy a home, or whatever that may be. I mean, we are there as a total 360 on their career. The reality is the negotiating of their contracts and their endorsement deals,
there you go,
is actually probably the easiest part of what it is that we do. I mean, that's a very small window of when we do it, the amount of time it takes to do that. I mean, obviously there's some negotiations that last months, but the reality is you're just relationship building, not only for yourself, but you're also doing that for your clients. You're trying to build, relationships that will be long-term for the clients. And sometimes you got to be a divorce attorney as well, right? So when things happen to separate, from one brand to another, you have to be, a little bit of a mediator in that. So, yeah, I mean, the job is all inclusive, and it is a 24/7, 365 type of program.
How much of the time is spent building the relationships, or let's say knocking on doors, looking for new sponsors, trying to create more revenue for the team, versus all the other things?
I think that's an ongoing process that, for me personally, that I've been doing for 40 plus years. I started racing very young, and I am still doing business today with people that were, people that I knew growing up. It could even be sponsors that I had, when I was 10 or 12 years old, that I'm still, I still have those relationships with, and you're still building them and developing them. And obviously people come and go and whatnot, but I think you're always in a relationship building business. I think that is truly the power of being a good manager or a good agent or good agency. Is it's certainly all about what your network is, and the type of reputation that you have. I'm very fortunate that I can walk into any pit area or any semi and speak to everybody, and The door never gets slammed in my face, which is a good thing. But it's always about building the relationships over time. I think that's a never ending story.
And I think that's probably the biggest reason why racers and riders and athletes in general need agents and agencies is so they can focus on their sport and improving in their sport and not spend so much time knocking on doors and doing the sponsor hunt, which is very, very, very time consuming. In fact, it's not fun having to look for sponsors. And so if you already have relationships through an agent, and that agent is able to make those introductions and perhaps find a business reason to work together, then it lets the athlete focus on the sport and improve and get better. And let's move over to Eric real quick, since you're right. I remember it was Yokohama and Cameron Steele, the tire promotions, and it was the Maxis, Deegan and Deegan first, I want to say the 2-stroke versus maybe there's 125 versus the Pro Light, and then the Pro Light versus the Pro 2. And
Actually, I think it was 450.
what was that?
450 against the Pro Light. And this was,
Okay.
it was a really interesting era. And I first of all, I've got to give it up to Bob Walker for believing in the vision and saying we can make this happen. It was the first year that Brian left the freestyle moto side and decided to do short course racing. And that was kind of the key thing. Maxis is a long-term client. They came to us and they said, well, we need a way to introduce Brian to the four-wheel side. And so the idea is, it's like, well, how do you do something with Brian? Because he's pretty, if you look at all of his videos from start to finish, he's pretty much done everything and repositioned himself in each and every way, as well as, created pretty epic storylines, even from like the early days of the Metal Militia and so forth. And so the idea was, it's like, well, how do we do something that's going to step out of the box? How is something we're going to do that's going to be ageless? And I still look at this Deegan versus Deegan video on YouTube every once in a while, and it's like, yeah, it was ageless. And the idea is that it was before GoPros. Is we were strapping Canon 7D cameras, onto the handlebars just so we can get that shot, with added a lot more weight and added a lot more complexity, and also added a lot more insurance that we had to pay at the end, because we did destroy 3 cameras. But the idea was, it's like, how do you tell a story? How do you tell a story? And it was, the idea was, Brian Deegan as the moto guy, as a 2-wheel guy, versus Brian Deegan of the 4-wheel side. And it was definitely a great learning process. And we had an amazing team that actually pulled this off in Brian's house. And I always look at the whole thing is that I look way back, and his kids were young then. Danger Boy was zipping around his little 50 and just, hanging it out there. And so, Haillie was actually selling Girl Scout cookies. So, and it's like Brian always looks like, yeah, she's selling Girl Scout cookies. And she kind of do a Brian twitch over here. It's like, oh, okay, we've got to buy, $300 worth of Girl Scout cookies in order to continue the film shoot. Got it.
Nice. Do you remember it that way, Bob, since you were involved?
Yeah.
And I love the fact that 2 agents are working together, by the way.
Yeah. And you know what? I think we all of us on this call have great working relationships with each other. To Jimmy's point, we were business partners in the early days together, and
Road to Recovery as well.
Yeah. Road to Recovery Foundation, starting that. And we still pick up the phone and compare and share notes. And Eric, same thing. I mean, that was an amazing piece. And it was a concept that Eric came together and he involved us on our side for our feedback. And it was a working deck, I would say, to get to that final piece. And I'd completely forgot about Eric for a while until you brought it up, but I'm like, that was a great piece. And it had such great traction. It was a piece before its time, I would say. But we all have great working relationships with each other to bounce things off of each other. And that's a very important value out there, is when you have an agent with relationships out there, is we know what's going on. We know what every team's doing. We know what they're paying for the most part, or we know who we can call to get that other intel, just to know what market rates are. And that's really, really important. You're cutting these deals. You want to make sure you're getting your client as much as you possibly can without breaking the bank.
I think that's important. What you're saying, both of you guys, is about agents working with other agents, because that's something that I think a lot of teams don't realize. Is they think an agent is just out there to raise money for you and make cold calls and send decks and create proposals. where the reality is an agent is integrated into the community through their friends and relationships and other agents. So like you just said, you understand the value, and that's real key, is because value is how agents get paid and how teams get paid. Let's jump on that for just a second. George is saying there's a question, but let me ask, well, let's do the question first. Go ahead, George. And then I'm going to get into, how do agents get paid, and do you get paid on value or retainer? I'm curious.
We're going to completely switch the subject. So let's continue on what you have, Alex.
Okay. I guess the question was not relevant to this real quick, but the big question that I'm most asked, and I know that everybody who's watching the recording right now is wondering, is how do agents get paid, and who pays for that? Is that paid by the company when the company sponsors? Is that on a retainer basis, or is everything unique? Bob, let's start with you, since you and I have already talked about this online.
Sure. Happy to jump in on it. It works a couple different ways, Alex. If we're talking as an individual representing a driver or a rider, a racer, for example, it's percentage based off the monies that we bring in. We typically don't touch their purse money. It's their compensation. It could be value in kind as well as cash. That's another piece. On the brand side, it's typically retainer based. If a property, for example, retains us as an agency to sell sponsorships on their behalf, that's usually a retainer plus sort of relationship there. Brands retain us to do work for them as well. And like when brands retain us, it's not typically for, finding them endorsement. Brands don't endorse other brands, but brands retain us because they need help on their social content, right, or they need help on their activation. A lot of times, so many outside the industry brands, will call it, get involved in our sport, and it's a one and done because they have another agency managing them that doesn't understand our industry, and they miss the mark.
Interesting.
And you see so many ads like with dirt bikes, and Jimmy will probably chuckle at this. You'll see a reversed out image of a guy doing a whip, and any of us in the industry, right, Jimmy? And you're like, oh my God, what are you thinking? And this is a publicly traded corporation that's very respected, and they just blew their image in our industry because they got some agency in New York City that never rode a dirt bike, never been to Baja or Supercross, whatever the sport may be. And they think they know it all. And they should have just checked their ego and brought us on, or Wasserman on, or someone else, Eric's group on, to help them do it right. And I'm like, guys, it's like, I use the saying from BASF, we don't make the product, we make it better. And we are experts in this industry that we're in, and we know what works and what doesn't work. And we know the right look, we know the right feel. We represent the athletes, which are the ultimate trendsetters and influencers out there. We have the pulse. So I've worked with some very big brands. It's like, we get it, Bob. We don't know what cool is in your world. Mm-hmm. We need you to make us cool. And that's because of our athlete. And so then they check their egos at the door. We'll bring an agency on like us to support them, to make sure their messaging and branding is correct within that industry. What we may propose here for motorsports isn't going to work in the NFL, isn't going to work in their sponsorship or Major League Baseball, or whatever other mainstream sports they may be involved in. But you got to be very clear in your messaging that it goes with our industry. Otherwise, you're done as a brand. And so that's the other thing we do as an agency, is not just the representation of the talent. Those brands that sponsor that talent, a lot of times we will bolt onto them and be their consulting agency within motorsports, and help them navigate and get set up correctly. And then it leads over to the content and the social media. And we will consult across all of that and streamline that process and help make the brand look better. They have more success in our industry. That happens, it makes the renewal even easier for us. I hate seeing one and dones, especially with the non-endemic brands coming in, because they have a bad taste and they're never coming back. And then they're just bad mouthing our sport to other brand managers across the country.
I think one of the
you nailed it.
Oh,
go ahead.
I think one of the key things that I go back to working with Bob on the Deegan program. Is we came in with the general big idea concept on it. And Bob and his team said, well, how about if we do this? How about if we add this to it? How about if we integrate Rockstar when Brian was at Rockstar at that point? How about if we, instead of having it at a track, why don't we utilize Brian's home? Why don't we do this? And he brought all of it was just, it's one of those things that it just started percolating. It's so Bob's communication about the agency is 100% right. Is if there can't be, if the agency doesn't check their ego in the door and just goes down their own route, even if they're well-rounded in the sport, they need to actually work with the agent and actually have that relationship and make sure it goes through the strategic direction of the athlete too. So the agent knows the athlete better than anyone else. They know what they had for dinner last night. They know their favorite meal. They know where they're going next week. They know how they respond to different things. They can also make things gel together in unison with the agency. And, I look at, we've done so many different integrations, athlete integrations, talent integrations, whatnot. And the ones I know that fail is the ones that they don't streamline, they don't connect the dots, they don't have that soul and that relationship going together. Even if the agency knows everything about this athlete or talent or whatnot, it's still going to fail. Unless you have that bond, it's not going to work.
Or perhaps the knowledge, and we're gonna have a question here in a second, but I'm gonna segue over to Jimmy real quick, because Jimmy, you used to race motocross and you've been in the industry forever. So you certainly understand the industry and how to represent your teams. I guess you would probably agree with a lot of what Bob and Eric just said. Obviously you've worked with you worked with Bob, I know, in the past. I'm not sure if you worked with Eric, but knowing the industry because you used to ride, that probably offers a huge advantage to you and Wasserman and the teams that you represent.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm almost jumping back a little bit to one of the earlier comments and questions. I think one of the main things that we do for me as an agent or as agency or whatever, I think it's education quite a bit, right? That's even with signing young athletes, and certainly Bob knows a lot about this because we've gone hand in hand into the pitch room together to do these things. But you really are educating. I'm lucky. I'm almost 50 years old. I've been involved in motorsports for the better part of that time that I've been on the planet. So you have a lot of knowledge, you have a lot of base, and you're educating. Whether it's a family that you're trying to sign the athlete, or it's always educating certainly when you're bringing in sponsors that are outside. Obviously, you're sitting at TLD right now. Obviously, those guys, they know about the sport. You're not having to educate Charlie on about the sport, but I remember many years ago we had Butterfinger that was representing Nate Adams at the time, and we had to educate them quite a bit, right? That's a huge brand, especially the parent company. And you're trying to educate them on what is right, what is factual, what is cool in our world, so that you look authentic. And I think that's another thing that has to lie on our shoulders quite a bit, because if you do engage a brand, and a lot of these big brands, they do write big checks, and it is fantastic. But at the same time, in taking that check, you have to make sure that you are being truly authentic, not only to the brand, but also to your client. Because the last thing you want to do is have this amazing blue chip company that comes on board and sponsors your client, and then the work that's done just doesn't resonate with their fans, with their with their public out there that are looking to them to see what is cool, what should I buy, what should I be a part of. So it's a lot of an education program, and I think that comes from knowing your client, knowing the sport, knowing the genre that you're in, and just being truly honest with what that is. And I've been very lucky. I raced, and then I was on the brand side very shortly with Bell Helmets, And then me and Bob got together in I think '01 and created our agency, which we later together sold to Wasserman. But so I've got to kind of play on all sides of the field here, and I can tell you from my experience, the thing that I try to do, and I know Bob shares this completely with me, is that we try to shoulder all the effort of anything that these guys or girls need so that they can go out and do the best job that they are capable of doing.
Yeah.
That way that they're not thinking about my sponsors. Am I doing everything? We're giving them guidance so that they can go out, focus on training, focus on sleeping and eating and performing at the highest level possible. And let us handle all the rest, the good and the bad. That way that they can go out and perform. Auto racing is a little bit different. Your window that you can compete is a little bit longer, but for motocross, you have a very, very, very small window to execute at a very high level and to have the best earning outcome possible. And so the more that we can shoulder for them, it gives our clients the best opportunity to make hay while the sun is shining, if you will.
That's a really good point. And I remember hearing a podcast several months back where Travis Pastrana was being interviewed, and they were talking about his appearance with Simon Cowell, and they wanted Travis to say, "I am extreme," because they still thought extreme sports was the correct term. And obviously action sports is what we prefer to say. And I don't know if Travis ever said I'm extreme or not, but they talked about that in the podcast. So it is knowing the industry and the terminology and knowing how to represent the athlete correctly using the brand, as opposed to what Nike did when they came into action sports 20 years ago. They came in and said, we are extreme sports, and they screwed it all up. So then they finally came in and started promoting and sponsoring athletes, which then gave them credibility. So George is saying that we have a question.
Yeah, so I think this question, can be answered by any of our guys, is Cam commented and said, even though there's quite a bit of crossover, we are relatively new to identifying the right influencers, ambassadors, and partners to maximize the launch of our new power sports batteries. So this is not an athlete, this is a brand question. Initially, our focus is much more on brand building in the segment. Would you focus on events, official product of, or would you focus on teams and riders, or a balance of the two? So Alex, you can direct that question to whoever you think.
Let's see. Lou, do we have your video back?
Think so. We're good.
All right. Let's see.
Technical difficulties. We're good now. Can you see me?
Can we see you? Yes, I guess we can see you. I
All
can't.
right.
I see
We got you,
nobody.
Lou.
All right.
right,
Good.
go ahead,
Good
Lou.
to be here.
Lou,
I'm
what
on.
would you do for a new battery? Let's say Optima Battery wants to come in and create more recognition and sales and distribution and presence in the motocross industry. What would you do?
Well, his question was, do we go for an athlete or do we go for an event? And my answer is both. You need to have a spokesman. You need to have someone that's on the track that's showing that your product works. You need to show, that it's doing and performing like they say it is. Now, if you're at a live event where there's, tons of other fans that are building their own, trucks, let's say, because it sounds like it's a truck question, like Lucas used to have, you also need to have that vendor space, and you need to have your sales people on site, and you'd be talking about the technical questions that someone's going to answer you for the battery and what application it's going to go in. Is it going to be a winter battery? Is it going to be an off-road race car? So I think you want to split your attention to a racer and to the public. It's sometimes it's difficult. A company like that, they'll put all their eggs in one basket and give it to, the driver. And I mean, there's a lot going on underneath that tent on race day. And sometimes you want to be there and answer questions that fans have for the battery or get those photos. But it's impossible. Some days you're bogged down, and depending on how your race is going, you can't do both. So I think you want to split your attention to both. in a scenario like that.
All right, thank you. Now, Bob, let me go to you real quick, and you can opt not to answer this because I know that the Deegans at least used to be sponsored by a battery company. I think they still are. You can answer that. What has been effective in promoting the battery company?
So yeah, the Deegans have been, they've had a long-standing relationship with Odyssey Battery. We brought them into the off-road world probably about 8-9 years ago, and they went athlete centric, and they did some property work as well, but now they've reached more the mature stage in their involvement in the world of off-road motorsports. They don't really make powers. Well, they are making some stuff now for the side by sides, but typically they've been, you know, a premier product for the off-road world. What I agree with what Lew is saying on the property as well as the athlete, to support both. A lot of times budgets don't allow that. Brands are trying to bite off more than they can chew, but in the ultimate world, if you can have the athlete and have the property, that's great. But not to get away from your question, Alex, about the success that we've had with Odyssey. With the Deegans, it's worked really well. You know, they came on board and supported Haillie when she was like in trophy carts. They were one of her very first sponsors, and they've ridden that wave. And this is a good example of brands that kind of come in, can get with the right talent. They can grow with that talent as their careers go as well. And it opens, they can draft off that. So like they're now next weekend, 2 weeks, they're going to have a primary of Haillie's truck at Pocono or at Kansas.
Oh, primary. Wow.
They'll have a primary sponsor. And that all started from a little deal of her racing a side-by-side. I can't remember the event. It was some event in a cornfield up in Minnesota 8-9 years ago. And they did that with her. And now they're a primary sponsor on her truck in NASCAR.
Wow.
Which is going to lead to bigger things. And now they're bringing a whole group of retailers to this race. So now they have a retail activation, they have a sales component tied to it, they have the branding tied to it, and it's a really cool story. Like, hey, we were here before everyone ever knew that she was going to even make it to NASCAR. And so that's an example of how that's worked well for that specific brand.
So 8 to 9 years of growth is quite amazing, actually. That's congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Let me jump over to Eric real quick, since you represent brands. Let's say you got a new battery company on board. What would your strategy be? And I'm putting you on the spot because you have not had time to think about it. I know that you have a 4-pillar process, but what would you do?
So one of the things that we do here is that we take proven processes or proven frameworks and work through that process versus just making a tactical decision. There's got to be a strategic direction. And this is something that we've learned through the years and working with great people. Got even the early days working Joe Parsons and Monster. We used to have these like long-winded conversations about this, but we kind of look at it like a table, a 4-legged table. Is you got the athlete, you got the brand, you got the media and the activations, and then you have the target audience. Mm-hmm. If one of those legs is gone, the table will fall over. Right. The top of the table is very specific, is tactics to retain customers, get repeat orders, and tactics to gain new customers. So if you got the legs and supported by the top of the table, and I know I'm oversimplifying it, but it just works. So instead of just throwing out tactics, is like, let's know everything about the athlete. And I even look at like the difference between Haillie and Danger Boy and Brian. 3 different personalities as they fall into the mix on everything. Then you got the brand. And so the brand might not be specific for one person, or it might be specific for another person, but then you have the media. Is it social? Is it content? Is it distribution? Is it web? Is it in-store? Is it activations? And, you talk about activations of, activating at a property, which I totally agree. You need to have a balance between the athlete or the personality and the property. You have to complete that circle. It's almost that yin and yang. And it's kind of funny because I think back at all the Lucas events that I think all of us have been mutually involved in, is you would see a brand come in and they would sponsor an athlete, but there's no way to integrate with them on the flooring. Or there was, someone that had a display there, and they weren't tied into an athlete. It didn't have that pull,
Yes.
yin and yang and that pull. So going through a framework, not having the answers right away, but working through the process and the framework is the most important way to get to that nirvana.
Right on. I
Yeah,
think you guys
hey,
all said the
Al-
same thing. Go ahead.
Yeah, Alex, I just wanted to, I was going to add to Eric's, but go ahead. Never mind. It's all good.
No, I'm
No, good, Bob.
finished. I'm finished. But
Forgot
okay,
what I was going to talk about. I'm going to fall on the sword.
that's an age thing, man. I know that happens to me all the time now. I hate it. I hate it.
We've
Raise-
all
raise
done
your
it,
hand if
right?
that
My
doesn't
old age
happen
is
to you.
kicking in.
Right on. Oh man, all the time, Bob. Okay, so George is telling me we have another question.
Yeah, so the question here is a little bit different than what you guys are currently talking about. And I'm sure that this is a question that all of the agents and agencies get today. What if I can't afford an agency? And Jimmy kind of brushed on it and said, you know, what do you do, or what kind of guidance could you give to little Johnny, who's a C-class mini rider or whatever it is, that does want sponsors and that does want to work his way up to sometime being able to work with you guys in the future, but he's just at his beginning stages. Maybe we'll start with Jimmy, and then we'll go to Bob, and then Eric and Lew.
Yeah, I think, and that happens all the time, right? We're always, I'm always getting phone calls from various people, and I actually have a really great example that I can share. So there's a young lady a number of years ago that her father reached out to me and said, "Hey, we would love to work with you. Take a look at what we're doing." And really and truly, there was no, it was quite a bit different than what Bob's working with the Deegan group, right? That's I call that a big organization. So whether they were young or not, there was stuff there to do that there was true monetary value in it. But in this situation, there really wasn't, and there wasn't going to be for a number of years. And so, what I told the dad was, listen, I like you guys. Why don't let's just become friendly with each other. Anytime you have a question, you have my number, you have my email, holler at me. I will help give you some guidance. I'm not going to spend a ton of time, going out and looking for, $1,000 sponsors or type of situation, because that's where it was at the time. But let's just build a relationship. And it goes back to what I said earlier about the relationship building. And over the period of time, she has progressed, and now we're working together in a really great way. But a long time ago, it wasn't really necessary for her to have an agent, but it was necessary for her and her family to have guidance and have a
Education.
sounding board that they could go to, and that's what we did, and that's what we created for them. And now it's a great relationship that we have that it took a long time to develop to where it is.
And her name is Serena Williams. I'm just kidding.
No. But it's just those things. It's about and I think all of us would probably do it. If little Becky or little Johnny or whoever it is, needs a little bit of some conceptual ideas on what to do and where to go and how to do it. I think all of us, we have an obligation to pay it forward a little bit, help these kids out. Because representing somebody on a full-time basis, as we've mentioned earlier, it is a nonstop. It is nonstop work, nonstop job. So,
Amen.
but helping someone out and giving somebody 10 or 15 minutes on the phone, once every other month or whatever that may be, which would give them a lot of guidance on what to do. I think that's something that we've all done and probably will continue to do for a long period of time.
I think that's excellent advice. It's like the legal industry has pro bono cases that lawyers give to people who can't afford it, but might one day become clients. Well, Jimmy, on that same note, why don't we stay here for a second, is how does a racer, rider, athlete, how do you find a good agent or agency to work with? What's the methodology to finding the right fit for your personal racing brand?
Well, I think, to be very honest, I don't think there's a lot of options out there, quite frankly. there are a handful of people doing what we do, doing this job in the call it in a motocross space. And so, there's only a handful of different avenues that you could take anyways, right? There's always, you always see the offshoot of somebody, that's they're a one-man show, if you will. They don't have any sort of agency behind them. They have no legal behind them. They have none of those things that is truly, an add-on that you really do want. We have great attorneys. We have, HR, this, that, and the other thing. So we have obviously we're a big agency, but we have the whole package. And there really isn't a lot of that out there that you could choose from. So, I think most of us are fairly well recognized, in our industries as people that would be good options to go to. And again, you could also have an agent that maybe only has one or two clients, period. And maybe it's even a little bit of a side hustle for them, and they could be very good. But I think if you're looking for a full turnkey package that can help you, during your career, as well as an exit strategy, and certainly with our NFL guys and our baseball guys, we end up with those guys. We end up turning them into broadcasters because we have a broadcasting division.
Interesting.
So just depending on what it is, we can help you now and as your career, sort of tails off, if you will. I think with Bob and the Deegans, I think it's been a pretty interesting ride watching what Bob's been able to do with Brian, taking him from 2 wheels to 4 wheels, and now what they've done with the family and the kids and everything else. That's a very interesting genesis that he's had. That's very unique in this world that we live in motorsports.
I have to agree with that. And watching the Deegans progress throughout their career, I've known Brian a long time, and the kids since they were very small. I agree with that. What Bob has done. I think, Bob, did you and Brian start out in Nebraska and you guys were buddies? And how did that start out? For those who are wondering how to get an agent like yourself to go from two wheels to 4 wheels, 4 wheels to NASCAR, and then now starting Pro Moto tomorrow. Wow.
It's one of one. I've known Brian a long time. We're both from Bellevue, Nebraska.
Nebraska, okay.
I'm a few years older than Brian, but I grew up watching him race at my locals. So I aspired to have a professional career. My talent wasn't quite there, and realized when it was time to go to college, I was probably better suited to go to college than try to chase the dream of being a professional motocross racer. But I knew who Brian was. It's not like he'd be a kid hanging out with me. I was racing 125s and 250s when he was on 50s and 60s, but it's that when you come from a town like in the Midwest, we're a small town, and someone makes it from there, everybody follows them. It doesn't have to be just motocross. It could be the football kid. It could be the baseball kid. Everybody knows that kid's making it at an elite level, and everyone's pulling for him and cheering for him. And Brian was a very talented racer growing up, and I followed his career when I went on to college, and I knew his dad, and my best friend, the Deegans, lived next to, and it was many years later we started cross paths at the X Games, Gravity Games, etc. And he's like, "Hey, I need help," and I'm like, dude, it'd be kind of cool to get back to, to come together, 2 kids from Nebraska doing this thing in motocross. Who would ever think, at the level that we're at now, we were just 2 kids from a podunk town in freaking Bellevue, Nebraska, cutting our teeth, but we were very passionate about this sport. We had a big love for this sport, and we've always wanted to make it bigger and better. And Brian is, as everyone knows, that guy's a showman. He is the Gene Simmons of the KISS Army and of action sports. That's how I define the Metal Militia when I'm on Madison Avenue. I'm like, KISS, Gene Simmons. Well, that's Brian Deegan, and that's the Metal Militia. He'll, when the lights go on, he'll play to his character. Lights are off. He's a really solid human being at the end of the day. And that's how we came together. And I believe you got to create your own luck sometimes, but it was just God had a plan and brought us together.
So he approached you and said, "Hey, let's work together." You didn't have a lot of experience at that point with this yet. What did you do to get started for those friends of racers who are smart and going to college and want to create a
Well,
business out of this? What's their first step?
I had a bunch of experience because
Okay.
we sold our agency to Wasserman, and then I was recruited away from Wasserman to go to Omnicom. And when I went to Omnicom, I was building out a property representation to do big property stuff. And that's when Brian approached me and he's like, "Hey,
Got it.
my Sobe No Fear deal's up. And can you help me find a new energy drink deal?" And that's when I came up with the idea. I was like, "Brian, Rockstar's taken off. We could do something with Metal Militia and Rockstar, and we could tie merchandise together. We could tie the whole team in. This is more than just a one guy deal. This is way, way bigger. It's got so many legs to it, and the brand's coming together." And that was one of the things that it really kind of helped springboard Rockstar at the same time too. When that all came together.
So that was cool because it's the B2B again. You're putting two brands together to lever their reach through one athlete, which then makes all the components larger and bigger and better and promote.
And that's one thing I've always strived on is the B2B side, because I'm always thinking about the renewal side of things. And if you can have a partnership that generates sales and revenue, that makes the renewal so much easier when you can tie sales back to a deal. Yeah. And having the ability for Rockstar to not just sell their product, but they also became a merchandise company.
Yeah, that's a good point. So Eric, same thing, since you are more on the B2B side, you represent a lot of brands. If a rider is looking for an agent to represent, what's a good way to approach somebody like yourself, or how do they find somebody like you to work with maybe on the B2B side?
Yeah, so first and foremost is I'm not on the agent side, I'm on the agency side.
Correct.
I represent brands, and I'm very upfront with it, is we don't represent athletes, is we work with athletes, or we work with celebrities, or we work with personalities, is we look to the leaders in this group here to make those recommendations. And we keep it pretty much as church and state. And for that reason is these guys on the panel are experts. They know it better than anyone else. It's not like we're just looking for someone just starting off. But I kind of want to take this question back to originally is you mentioned is like, well, how do people start off? How do they gain sponsorship if they're just beginning? And I always remember the time, kind of going back to the Deegans is, I remember it was Pro Light days, and Brian's wife was working on Haillie's PowerPoint to pitch her for trophy card. And it's basically is like, you got to start, you have to crawl, you have to walk, you have to run. But the overall aspect is find yourself in the early days is find yourself a epicenter that you can get this education, information, intrigue. And I always look back to your first book where we connected many years ago, Explanation, is read Explanation. Take a highlighter and highlight that, because you're going to be able to figure out exactly how these people got to where they needed to go. And then I also look at all the great stuff you're doing on your website. Go watch the videos. Get educated first. And it kind of goes back to, I remember it was a Torque press conference unveiling at Oakley many years ago. And there was a father there, and his kid raced trophy cart, and he brought the trophy cart there. It was all decked out monster. He knew Mark Hall was going to be there, so he had his son with monster clothes, the whole thing, and he basically cornered him. And it's like, hey, we need to do a sponsorship with my son. Okay, you don't. It's kind of like trying to say you surf Pipeline or Jaws, and you've never been in the ocean. You have to learn. You have to unpeel the onion first before you can move forward on it. And you can't get to that point until you know. And I look at what you're doing, Alex, and I look what everyone in the panel is doing here is like, there's a lot of years of amazing experience here. And you have to learn that step by step by step. And I remember a book I got many years ago is The Strategy of Racing. Is my kids raced trophy carts many years ago, and they thought they were going to be like the next F1 racers. And it's like, what, you know what, out of my pocketbook.
Mine
But
too.
I gave them that book each to make them really understand the strategy of racing. And it's that 360-degree process of it. My youngest son, he read it book to book, and now he runs a multi-million-dollar company at 22 years old with 30 employees and 26,000 square foot facility.
That's Van Speed, right? Van Speed.
Yeah, so it's he's super proud of him. My older son, he took it from another route, is he looked for more of the publicity side and how to get it. My middle one took it from looked at it from the business side of like, well, how to get to do those things and so forth. And so my thing is like, know everything first. Be curious, step outside your comfort zone, and know your place. Until you know your place and you're at that place, you can't get there.
That's a really interesting way of putting it, because I know Lew was representing Jeremy McGrath, who went from 2 wheels to 4 wheels, and talk about getting out of your comfort zone. They say with age comes the cage. You know, you take a Supercross, 7-time Supercross champion, you throw him into a pro truck. How is that any different from motocross?
Well, I love what Eric just said about the kid that showed up with a full monster setup and thought that would, unveil a sponsorship for him. And, I see it at every level. And I know we're talking about like the superstars, and these are the best agents in the world. I think I want to just kind of take it back to the people that are watching, the dads, the kids that are C-class, B-class riders. And they have this delusion that they're ready for that top level sponsorship of a Troy Lee, a Monster. And I call it like a sponsor snob, where they only want to have the best thing. And it doesn't work that way. Like you need to know you're not a national rider, you're a local rider. So pick a local area and figure out what you can do in your local region. If you race locally, then look at the local cycle shop. I mean, I grew up, I wasn't a great rider, but I grew up with Jimmy and Jeremy riding it. And I was a novice and intermediate. And, my biggest supporter was North County Yamaha. And they helped me race and get to the races and pay an entry here or there. And what I would do is I would take flyers to the races and put them on windows when they had their big Memorial Day sale. Like you can take it down to the smallest level and learn this process with your local pizzeria and tell them you're going to come and have the after race party at their place. Like there's so many things you can do to learn this business, and you don't have to be a pro rider, but everyone wants a sponsor and everyone wants to feel needed. So I encourage, the riders to not try and do that huge triple first, like roll the track. Let's figure it out. Like approach something local within 10 miles. If you're a kid that only has a bicycle, like figure out what you can do in your neighborhood even. And that's the best starting ground. Just finding even a little sponsor that will maybe pay your entry, or you can, take stickers to high school and hand it out for the local shop. Like, don't think so globally right yet. Like enjoy it. And you're not going to get an agent right yet, but you know what? You might have fun with it. And there might be a kid in your class that loves business, and he might want to like take on that role and have fun with it when you're 12, 15 years old. Enjoy the racing part. Don't automatically think you're going to get the wrap sprinter and you're going to be there at the track. It doesn't work that way. And I go to the local Wednesday night ride at Lake Elsinore, and I would say 90% of the riders there, the kids there, are headsetted up. They're yelling at their kids to do track time, like laps. They have sponsors on the side that I guarantee that the brand doesn't even know it's on their trailer, just because they want to look like they're supported. Like, I think it's better to have fun at this age, at the younger age. And again, think locally. Think what you can do for your shop. Think what you can do for a local restaurant or even a car dealership. We were trying to get Chevy. We were trying to get Ford from McGrath Motorsports, trying to get this huge level sponsorship. And we had to do the same thing. We took it back to Lake Elsinore Dodge, and they were happy to give us money and vehicles. And we're really excited to be associated with a brand like that. And they helped us a lot. And, we would have never thought that. You'd think, okay, we got Jeremy, we're going to get a Chevy deal. Nope. There's no manufacturers in that sport at the time. Maybe Brian had one, but it was again, you kind of had to reel it in, say, okay, Lucas is regional. That's all we're racing. We're going to have to focus on sponsors that we can help in this area. So again, if I just have, one thing to stick with, not everybody is going to make it to that 1%. So enjoy the ride up, and maybe it will take you another direction. Maybe if you are a rider and you don't make it to that top level professional rider, then maybe you become an agent, or maybe you become in a marketing department. There's a lot of career paths that can happen. And I'm a prime example of that. I was never a professional rider. I was always around them, and I always knew a lot about contracts. I always knew a lot about sponsorship, and I wanted to always be sponsored, but the cards weren't on the table for me. So, I kept my eyes open and looked for the doors that were open, and made something of it. So that's, what advice I can give.
Well, I'm glad that you brought up the local aspect, because that's something that we really didn't hit on, but you're right. For the amateur teams and those that are just starting out, your local sponsors are the ones who are going to get you to the next level. So what Lew said is right on. It might not be something that an agent will help you with or can help you with, because it's probably a much smaller deal, usually product or in kind or entry fees, things like that.
Yep.
But when you're starting out and you don't have those big sponsors yet, look local, because those local deals can turn into bigger or national deals. Now,
Yep.
we just have, yes, go ahead.
One thing I would add on to what Lew just said, I mean, it is true, right? Everybody's, whether it's on TV or on the web or whatever it may be, they see, you see the guys that make it, right? But the reality is, if you make it all the way, you're a unicorn. You really are. And so be humble. I would say that more than anything. Just be humble. I mean, I've seen, and hell, we've all seen it. We've seen the kid that was an amazing 60 rider, and then he was an amazing 80 rider, and he gets on a big bike and he has no idea what to do. And then you see the kid that did nothing ever, and then he gets on a big bike and you're like, oh my God, where did this guy just come from? He just appeared out of nowhere. So you can go either direction. You could be the standout that really never makes it, and then you could be the nobody that one day it really, really clicks. So I would say, more than anything, be humble, and you're going to get punched in the face in this sport a lot, physically and metaphorically. So you got to take those punches and go, but like, be humble about it, and don't think that to what Lew was saying, don't think that you're going to get the Fox ride, or you're going to be riding for the Star Yamaha team or whatever it may be. I mean, there's so many bumps in the road that might kick you forward, might kick you to the side, or whatever it is. So that's the thing that I would say to anybody watching this: be very humble, and know that there is always somebody faster, smarter, better than you are at this time. So if you don't think that you're at the very, very top, like, that's always a good thing, because you're always striving to be something. So just be humble, I would say, to anybody watching.
I think those are great words of advice, just in general, for lifelong advice. We have one quick question, only 60 seconds to answer it, and then we're going to head over to the next panel. So George, what you got?
Yeah, sounds good. There was a group question from Chris Stifler. First, he asked if he could have Bob Walker's autograph. And then he actually had a group question. He says, is a 4-year BS in marketing necessary? And I think this kind of goes along with what you guys were just talking about. There is only one school that offers motorsports marketing as a bachelor's degree. I have a library full of books, but I don't have near the skills I need. Where else can someone learn the skills? And I think you guys have learned it all through the years, right? But maybe you guys can explain a little bit more.
Bob, do you want to jump on that? We only have 60 seconds.
Yeah, if you're in college, you can come to my class at Arizona State this November that I'm going to start teaching on sports communication, sports marketing, and motorsports. And I'll be teaching that at Arizona State as a guest lecturer this fall, believe it or not.
Nice.
But what was the second part of that question, Alex?
That's really cool. That's cool. You didn't tell me that. I didn't know that. I'm at Vanguard next week doing the same thing. Congratulations. That's cool, Bob.
Thank you. Thank
you.
you.
Bob, where can people get information about that? Because I think that would be valuable to the audience.
Well, you'd have to be enrolled as a full-time student at Arizona State, unfortunately. This is a trial period. This is a trial to see how this class goes this year. And if it goes well, they'll be more legs to it, but it's for their existing communication department. So it's not like you can go take the one-off class or anything. It's a locked and loaded deal, unfortunately.
Okay, so quickly, I think maybe just answer in 30 seconds what you think somebody could do to get educated to be in a position to help with their marketing needs.
Yeah,
Go be an intern, or
Yeah.
go to a race team and say, hey, I want to work for you guys. I will sweep the floors. I will do whatever it is. I want to be in and around whatever it is that you guys are doing, wherever that passion is that you guys have, wherever that lies. To be an agent, like, go learn the business, learn who's who and whatever it is. I mean, I think point blank, that's one of the best things that you could do. You need experience, you need knowledge, and you need relationships. Start building them.
That's the way to get all three. Yeah. Just go and jump in the deep
I
end.
agree wholeheartedly with Jimmy on that.
Yeah.
Donate your time. Don't go looking for a grip of money. If you really want to be in this industry, I mean, Jimmy had an incredible racing career that led him to, to get into this, but like, I've donated so much of my time in the early days and didn't work for anything just to get my foot in the door, because I was so passionate that I knew I wanted to be in this sport. And I get kids that do internships, they come in and they want to know what they're going to get paid. It's not like, what am I going to do? It's what am I going to get paid? And I'm like, yeah, they're not really in this as much as they think they are for the passion. This is a passionate sport.
I think the big thing about that is when you, like, I spent a lot of time donating my time. And when you donate your time, you get so far ahead. You meet people you normally wouldn't meet. You get involved with different things you normally wouldn't do. And you get great opportunities along the way. And everyone on this says, on this panel says it's best. It's like, you know what? These are the relationships you're building for years. These are the stepping stones. When you need to make that call and ask for that favor, is you've already got that relationship, and it makes it a lot easier. So.
Yeah, agreed. Well, thank you, Eric. Thank you,
Hey,
Bob.
Alex, can I say one more thing?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So one of the things that I've learned through this whole process, and Bob actually taught me this a long time when we were first business partners: take every call, take every meeting. You never know what's going to happen.
Wow. Yep. Yes, and it's frustrating when people don't. That happens. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Lew, Eric, Bob. You guys were awesome. It's for the best agents and agencies in motorsports and motocross. We are going to transition now over real quick to the next session. It's called Getting Into the Media. George is going to lead this session, Getting Into the Media. So I get to take a real quick break, and I'll try to do the technical end of it. I don't know if I can very well, but forgive me if I don't do it as good as George. So guys, hang on. We need 60 seconds to change.